Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we unravel the business complexities at the intersection of environmental, social, and governance issues.
I'm Erika Schiller, and I'm joined by my ClimeCo colleagues, Emma Cox and Anna Stablum.
Get ready to explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership, the dynamic forces shaping our global economy.
From climate action to social responsibility, we're here to decode the ESG landscape by interviewing interesting leading figures across the globe that will empower you with actionable insights.
Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or just embarking on your sustainability journey, this podcast is your compass for navigating the future of responsible business practices.
Let's decode ESG together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to ESG Decoded. I'm your host, Erika Schiller. Today, we're joined by Ryan Bennett. Ryan's the Executive Director at the US Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry Eggs, and he also is the Executive Director of the International Poultry Welfare Alliance. So we're going to start talking about sustainability in the agriculture space and in the poultry and egg space specifically. And we'll also tie in some discussion around animal welfare, because that ties into kind of what metrics are being used to talk about sustainability in this space and the ESG role. So first, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, can you share with our audience, what is the US Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, and what are your goals? What are you working on?
Yeah, so the US Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs is a multi-stakeholder group. So we include everybody in the entire supply chain, from farm to fork, from hatchery to household. We have everybody during every segment of the supply chain. So that would include the people that produce the feed and mill the feed. And then after the feed is milled, it gets sent to a farmer. Before a farmer gets chicks, somebody has bred those birds. So there's genetics companies, hatcheries, that then those pullets or baby chicks get placed at the farm. And then obviously they're fed the feed and they grow up and they're transported. So there's transportation involved. And then they're transported ultimately to a processing plant where you might have 5 different customers, receiving those products from there. So like grocery stores and quick serve restaurants and those sorts of things. Throughout that process, there is hardly anything wasted. So anything that we're not using in food, we're sending that to rendering, taking the fat, taking the protein that's left over after we take out the poultry meat, and you turning that into things, whether it be animal feed, or we even have some people creating, aviation fuel, renewable aviation fuel from those products. So, and then we also have the associations involved, professional societies, scientists, academics, environmental NGOs. And so it really runs the gamut of everybody who plays a role in the supply chain. And what we found is when you have one sector kind of leading that over another, things might not end up as material or as on point as, maybe they should be, or what's accurate for the sector. So we get people in the same room that sometimes disagree and find ways to agree with one another. And from that, we measure sustainability and communicate our progress, as well as work to continuously improve those metrics where we feel like we might need some more work over time. So we're trying to, talk about what we're doing well and where we think we need to get better, improve.
Great. So you're saying this roundtable is really a broad group of stakeholders, from, maybe some small family farms to really large agricultural industries, and their restaurants and grocery stores that can be small and large. So it's a diverse group that you're getting together and talking about how to drive sustainability initiatives. That's really great to see those forums coming together and kind of working towards common goals. Does this industry in the US have a big carbon footprint? How does it compare to other similar animal or agriculture?
Yeah, we obviously have a carbon footprint, and it is material to our supply chain in terms of the sustainability indicators that we measure. We're very efficient. So we're a monogastric species. So there's one stomach and a chicken. And because of that, we don't release much methane through our production systems.
Compared to a cow, right?
Compared to a cow, that obviously has enteric emissions or belching emissions from digesting that feed within the four compartments of its stomach.
And those emissions are methane, just for our listeners in case they're not sure.
Right. Sorry. We are very efficient. We're vertically integrated. So that means the growers are independent and they own their farm, but their barns have to be, within a certain spec. They're fed a specific feed that meets the specific nutrient requirements of the animal that they're growing, which, by the way, they'll grow different breeds of animals based on the end customer at those processing plants. So some plants will be smaller birds, some plants will be medium-sized birds, and some plants will be larger birds. And we don't just feed them differently. There's different genetic lines that are made specifically to fit those specs. And so then obviously that's all integrated and coordinated by the processor. So the chicks, down to when the chicks are placed in the poultry house at the grower, onto what feed they're giving, what genetics they're using, how they ventilate their barns, how they heat their barns, how they cool their barns. All of that is being managed throughout the entire system. So that way, when it's all said and done, we're producing an efficient product. So there's a reason why we're price competitive. And that directly correlates to some of our sustainability indicators that we'll talk about later. But in general, we definitely have a carbon footprint, but we feel like because we're monogastric and we only have that one stomach and we're so efficient at producing this product that we probably work on it a bit much compared to some of our other material indicators. So like I said, it meets the materiality test, but as somebody who's worked on climate for quite a lot of time, we have some other areas where we could be working and spending more time, but it's still important. And we're getting asked a lot of questions about it because we're viewed as a livestock species. And because we're viewed as a livestock species, there's a lot of pressure to set carbon reduction goals and meet those over time. So we are spending a lot of time on it. Our biggest thing that creates carbon emissions is actually the feed production. It's not the production of the animal.
So growing the corn or grains to feed the chicks.
Corn and soybeans, which becomes soybean meal that then gets milled together along with other components, vitamins, minerals, other things, fiber, and then goes into the feed as a protein and fat source. And so, you might be growing birds in Alabama, but your corn and soybean meal might be coming from the Midwest and being trucked, barged, railed down to where you're feeding it. So we don't have a lot. That's our big scope 3 factor. We don't have a lot of control over that. And it's also our biggest cost of production. So back to that cost element, our biggest cost is buying that grain and milling it. And that's also correlates with where the biggest part of our carbon footprint is coming from as well.
And you just recently published a sustainability reporting framework for your supply chain. Can you share some about what are the key metrics that are being measured in that framework?
Yeah, so we measure people, planet, and poultry. We do have a couple of general questions that would kind of maybe get a little bit into the governance type of things. But we're really focused on the materiality assessment and measuring those, identifying those indicators, and then obviously metrics that come underneath of them. And underneath of people, just as a couple of examples would be food safety, worker HR practices, community support and community relations, because we want to be good neighbors. And then the planet section, obviously land, air, water. For us, land would be both the feed emissions that I just talked about, as well as application of litter or manure, chicken manure, and that would also obviously to some extent affect the air and water as well, to make sure that we're doing things well there. And then obviously water use. So it's water quality would be more focused on what we're doing with the litter and how we're properly applying that manure or litter to the land and controlling those nutrients and making sure that there's correct uptake so that way there's not runoff. But then we also obviously look at water quantity, and water quantities, we have obviously the birds need to drink water. They are allowed to drink as much water as they want, but especially when you get to the processing plant, you're cleaning things, and that's when that really, I would say, becomes a bigger factor. So yeah, land, air, water, and obviously air would include greenhouse gas emissions, back to our previous conversation. And then for the poultry portion, that's really getting back to mostly the live birds. So what are our animal health practices? What are our biosecurity practices? I'm sure you've heard a little bit about avian influenza in the news at some point.
Definitely.
As well as animal welfare, which is a big part of what we do as well.
Yeah, so your role in International Poultry Welfare Alliance, how does that, support the work that you're doing at the Roundtable? And are there conflicts or disagreements?
So there can definitely be times to where doing the right thing for the animal can have an environmental impact. But there's also times to where doing the right thing for the animal can have impacts on workers and labor and, how much we're handling those birds and, putting people in harm's way. So it's really a lot to balance. Obviously, care of the animal comes first. That's kind of central. I've got people on my board that are in charge of live operations for egg companies that would tell you my boss is not the CEO, my boss is the chicken. And so really where IPWA comes in, the International Poultry Welfare Alliance that I'm also the executive director of, they've really focused on outcomes-based key welfare indicators that we've included in the US Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Egg framework, where our people get online and fill out this kind of questionnaire every year and we monitor their progress. The KWIs are very interesting because there's been a ton of discussion over, in Europe, we should put windows in the barns. We should have cage-free eggs, or we should raise organic, or we should have only this amount of square feet. You should only raise birds with this type of genetics. A myriad of just different practice-based things that people have talked about and wanted to transition the industry to, and not maybe all at the same time, maybe not at all for some of those, and they want some of the others. So there became a point, even though pretty much everybody receives a third-party audit on their animal welfare programs, there comes a point to where, is the animal welfare good or is it not good? So what IPWA has really done is focus back on the animal, eyes on birds. Are they interacting well with their environment and are they not? What is their movement like? Are they getting lesions on their paws? How clean is the air that they're breathing? All these different things that we can measure and monitor, and that we should already be measuring and monitoring, to tell us how things are going or not going. And then from there, if things are obviously something that you would like to improve, that would lead back to the practices that we talked about before. But we've kind of been putting the cart before the horse a little bit with our animal welfare discussions. And we're really focusing on, where is this animal's life good and where does it need to be better? And allowing that to lead us back to the practices, rather than kind of, prescribing things at the outset as a silver bullet or panacea. That's often not true. So we have those key welfare indicators in the framework, but we also have on the poultrywelfare.org, IPWA's website, we have those key welfare indicator guides, and people are using those around the world. There's a lot of major, especially the quick serve restaurants, and a couple of grocery stores are starting to work with their suppliers to get that data, because they're in a tough spot too. They don't raise chickens, right? And they're getting some groups coming in and saying, like, all the chickens that are in your store are not raised up to par from an animal welfare perspective. And then they kind of get the industry on the other side saying, like, look at all the stuff that we're doing. We do a good job. And they're kind of left in the middle. So this is really helpful to, I think, that retail food service sector to like cut through the fog and the noise and really understand their supply chain and how those birds are being raised.
Okay, so how you're measuring welfare, how you're reporting it, and having a transparent kind of apples to apples. Yeah. Okay, interesting. So, I saw on your report and on your website, for the US Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, that you talk a lot about continuous improvement. So, you have this framework, you have the people, poultry, and planet as the three pillars. And measuring is the first part, but then also encouraging, once you have that transparency of here's our baseline and here's what we can do to improve, making that continuous improvement an iterative process. So how do you see, what do you see on the horizon as the keys to driving sustainability improvements in the poultry space?
So I'm really glad that you asked that question. Quick tangent. We spend so much time talking about measurement, and it's obviously the cornerstone, and it's so key and it's so important. But I don't know, I want to see things get better. So I love the continuous, that's the start, right? So I love the phase that we're in. And by the way, our metrics are always going to get better and improve, and we can always get better than that at that. And that's always going to be a key part of what we do. But what I'm really happy about is this continuous improvement stage. So, getting back to animal welfare, obviously, is always going to be key. Biosecurity is a huge deal right now. It always has been for us, by the way. So one of the examples I give to our folks, because in the production side, we get a lot of feedback. Well, our customers aren't asking for this, so why are we having to do all this work and measure it? And so, for example, we were getting asked a ton of biosecurity questions in the production side of things before avian influenza, but we had that data because it's so material to what we do. Animal health, animal disease is so important to what we do. So we had that data, but now we're going to obviously do even more. And so animal health, animal welfare, obviously the carbon thing, and specifically feed, figuring out how to work with our partners downstream. The feed mills, we can do a lot with what we control. So if we can get minor reductions from improving the feed efficiency of the animal, but applied over the entire system, it adds up to quite a bit. But obviously we're trying to get further back and get back to kind of the field origination level of that grain, understanding how to measure that, understanding how we fit in and working with our partners there. So field to market would be a good example. The American Feed Industry Association and iFeeder would be a good example of who we're working with there. And then really, there's some neat emerging things. Is this rendering side, it's one of the coolest parts of the industry that nobody talks about. We are as circular as you can get. I mean, that chicken litter that is used as fertilizer to grow the crops that create the corn that's then milled into feed that is then fed back to the bird. Same thing at the processing plant. We are also utilizing all of the protein and fat that doesn't get used as poultry meat to go into, like I said before, the dog food, the aviation fuel, any number of different avenues for that use. And then on the people side of things, we work with US Poultry at their HR and Safety Council to really figure out, and labor is a big challenge in any industry right now that requires any amount of labor, and we're not excluded. So we're looking at how do we get people to come to work and how do we get them to like coming to work. And what we're finding is it's very different culturally around the country, depending on the area and depending on the type of worker that you have in your area. And so we're even working with them through that group at US Poultry, their HR and Safety Council, to really figure out what people want and need specific to their kind of labor market and how do we recruit them and then how do we retain them over time. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things going on. There's some innovations in food safety, et cetera, that are coming down. But I would really say, HR and safety for people, carbon and kind of our circularity aspect, somewhat regen ag, it would kind of be cool. And then continuing to beef up biosecurity, but really focusing on animal welfare because it's so important to what we do and it's so important to our image as well. And I think kind of cutting through some of the fog and really making sure that we're doing the right things. But, I would say even more importantly, making sure that we're getting the credit for what we are doing and, really spotlighting the amount of attention that we're paying to these animals and making sure that their lives are improving and that is a measurable thing. And being able to communicate that, I think, is going to be an issue for us forever. I think that will never go away.
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting you're talking about when we think about sustainability, it's a lot broader than just the carbon footprint or the environmental metrics, right? It's about the animals, the people, the community. That really feels like it meets the kind of broader ESG landscape of, here are all the key metrics that will make this a healthy and vibrant industry and produce high quality products that people want to buy. And when you think about this 5-year, 6-year journey that the Sustainable Roundtable has been on to create the framework and, get all of these diverse stakeholders from big companies to small farms and everything in between to work together, agree on what are the key metrics, how they're measuring them, and what good is, right? Are there some key learnings that you think would help other industry groups, or how do you think this could apply more broadly than just poultry and eggs?
Obviously, I'm a big fan of the multi-stakeholder structure. So that would be the first thing I would say. So in some industries, it just makes sense for one sector to lead it. I see that in other agricultural sectors, et cetera, et cetera. But creating the power dynamic to have that discussion where you can be on an equal footing and maybe letting, a professional facilitator kind of take the wheel and take, control a little bit rather than everybody feels like they want to control everything if they're going to pay for it, right? But I think you would be surprised. I was surprised at how well we were actually able to get together and how ably we were able to move through some of those tougher discussions compared to the concept that I had coming in, because, traditionally a lot of these people have fought against each other. You can look at literally almost any segment of the supply chain and there's some form of tension between where one takes off and the other one hands off. So I guess what I would say is, trust somebody who's really good at professional facilitation and give some power to kind of everybody at the table and have those tough discussions, because if you don't allow those to happen, they're going to occur anyways. So you might as well just have them up front and go through maybe a little longer process than you would have liked. Like, I think, could a 5 of us have sat in a room and come up with something pretty similar to what we came up with? Yeah, probably. But I don't think the processing sector would have learned as much about their growers. I don't think growers, have no access to retail and food service companies that are driving a lot of the things that they ultimately do on farm. And so understanding why, if I'm a retail and food service company, why I'm being asked for these things down at the farm, we got a lot of, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And the grower would say, well, I can tell you what you're not asking, that you should be asking. And this is what I care about on a daily level, and understanding those points of view. That took a little bit longer, but like I said, from that became a group that's a lot more trusting in one another and a lot more behind the product that we put out. So that would be my biggest thing.
Yeah, that's fun to hear. And I think it makes sense. As, Climeco, we do a lot of community engagement work when we're, working on a new carbon project, like restoring a native forest, or even doing industrial decarbonization work. It's really important for all the stakeholders to understand why you're doing this work, what the impacts are, and also hear from them how they're being impacted by the work you're doing. So, that really rings true in terms of building coalitions and helping people really work together in different industries or different parts of the same supply chain. Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to seeing the continuous improvement that's happening in your industry. And And also, I thought it was interesting when you were sharing about the biggest carbon footprint in your supply chain is the feed. And so, following what types of innovations are happening in the grower agriculture space, like different fertilizers, regenerative farming, no-till farming, different ways to reduce the carbon footprint there. And I'm curious, as we look forward, how that will be measured and how that will also be what the benefits will be for the farmers who produce a lower carbon feed will be, right? Because I think that's going to be critical.
We are also very interested in that, but thanks for figuring it out for us, Erika.
Well, at ClimeCo, we're doing a lot of innovation in this space.
It's a very easy topic to tackle. You'll be fine. That's a joke, of course. But no, in all seriousness, we're having those same discussions. And those are the hard ones. And luckily, we're in a place to where, we have the space to have those discussions because we've done a lot of the hard work. And that's what's left. And so we're on our path. I would say everybody wishes we could have gotten started sooner, but we have worked very quickly to get to where we are. And like I said, now we're landing on the $1 million questions. That's what's exciting that I kind of left out working through the people, planet, and poultry. Overall, the place where we are in our journey is having those kind of tough futuristic discussions that we don't know the answers to yet. And that's okay, but what's important is that somebody's working on those.
That's great. Ryan, thank you so much for sharing a lot about the, U.S. poultry and eggs space that I didn't know. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be learning more about it as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to ESG Decoded. We hope this episode has inspired you to take action in your own ESG journey, stimulating ideas for partnership and innovation.
New episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesday morning. Subscribe now on your favorite streaming platform to stay in the loop.
Join the conversation on social media using @ESG Decoded or visit climeco.com for more resources.
Until next time, keep decoding, keep innovating, and keep making a positive impact.